a plethora of top secret, highly secure locations across South Texas and maybe even beyond. This is the Spurs Insider Podcast, preseason edition, the last preseason edition before we start to look at the season opener. And depending on when this podcast is making its way through the internet into your listening and viewing device, even though I know you're not viewing, we have some breaking news here with Express News sports editor Nick Talbot, the polarizing Jeff McDonald, Tom Ringo star Orsborn, and your host Mike Finger. Just seconds, if not minutes, if not a couple hours before this podcast recorded, we had just earth-shattering transactional developments on the Spurs Insider beat. I will leave this up to, let's let Ringo tell the world what just happened and how the Spurs nation foundation has just been shook to its core.
The Luka era is over. It ended with him being waived just about an hour ago. Shook San Antonio to its core. He's gone. 19th overall pick in 2019. Never lived up to expectations, played more in the G League and got more production in the G League than he did with the big club. And the writing was kind of on the wall with the way they used him in preseason. He got the start in Miami, but played sparingly, looked a bit out of shape and against the Heat. And they finally let him go today.
This is, we're kind of making fun of the momentousness of this occasion, but it is really out of the ordinary in that we can say sort of unequivocally that the Spurs swung and missed on a draft pick, which they don't do very often, have not done in the first round in a long, long time. This was a miss, mitigated in large part by the fact that a few picks later in that same draft, they scored with Keldon Johnson in the pick that came in the Kawhi Leonard deal. I guess I'll throw it over to the polarizing Jeff McDonald for what he thinks about this, the significance of, basically letting a guy you drafted in the first round in the top 20 of a draft 2 years ago, letting him go and basically paying him a couple millions to leave. What do you think is the bottom line here?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the roster situation the Spurs are in coming in to preseason. They have 17 players with fully guaranteed NBA contracts. They're going to need to make that 15 by the time the season starts. So they're going to have to cut two guys on full NBA guaranteed contracts coming this camp. And that doesn't happen very often. Usually if you've got a guaranteed contract in camp, you're golden. But we knew there were two guys they were going to have to cut. And as camp went along, I think going into camp, I think there were probably four, or maybe not going into camp, but as we kind of thought about this through the offseason, there were kind of four names on the list that I thought would be kind of on that bubble. I would have, back in August, I would have said Drew Eubanks might be a candidate for this. I would have said Keita Bates-Diop would have been a candidate for this. I would have said Al-Farouq Aminu would be a candidate for this. And I would have said Luka Šamanić would have been a candidate for this. And as camp went along, as the preseason games went along, like Ringo said, the writing began to appear on the wall as to like, it wasn't surprising to me that they waived Luka today after watching what I've watched in the last couple of weeks.
Well, I just want to point out, and this might be kind of self-evident, but the reason they came into camp having to trim two guys, like they probably had in mind those same four names, or at least two names ahead of time. It's not like they showed up to camp and it was like, oh God, we have 17, we have too many. We're gonna have to get rid of two guys that we wanted. The reason they had two more guaranteed contracts than they had spaces is because they knew they had two guys they were willing to get rid of. Yeah. So I think Luka probably could have changed their minds over the past couple of weeks if he had showed up and kind of just blown them away, show him that he was in shape and had learned something over the past couple of years, whatever. But I don't think it's like our good friend Don Harris posted a clip from the preseason game on Sunday, in which shows Luka kind of giving up on a play, and it's the classic thing that Pop hates, and it's no coincidence that he's waived the next day. But it's like, that one play didn't get him waived. You're already in a position where you're probably not going to make the team, where you have to impress Pop. You have to impress your teammates. You have to make an impression. And he just didn't do that.
Yeah. No front office wants to waive a 19th overall pick who is still 21 years old after 36 games of NBA experience. Like, I feel like and again, I haven't talked to anybody today about this, but I feel like they went into camp just hoping he would give them a reason to keep him. Right. Give me a reason to keep you around. And it didn't happen. And yeah, that pick ends up being a miss, which happens. And, we can do this later if you want. It's the thing that GMs love when they have a bad pick. People to go through guys that were picked after that guy and talk about, all the guys you could have had instead of Luka. It's a fun game. It's a fun game for like fans and us to play, but
right.
Also not always so fair. But like the next pick was Matisse Thybulle.
Yep.
Which he's a good player. I think if he didn't make an all defensive team last year, I'm sure he got votes. You could argue if the Spurs made that pick, they probably don't take Keldon Johnson 29.
That's exactly right.
But the other guys on the list, the next pick was Brandon Clark.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good player. Grant Williams, Nasir Little was on this list. Then there's some other guys that were picked that you don't feel like you missed out on. Mfiondu Kabengele. I can't pronounce his first name. I think he's been a couple places in wave. But there's some second round guys. Nicholas Claxton for Brooklyn. He kicked the Spurs' butts last year. Eric Paschall, Taylor Horton Tucker,
mm-hmm.
Terrence Mann. There was some, but a lot of teams can do this in a lot of drafts. So it's just.
And I don't want to come off as an apologist or as like a draft nihilist where nothing matters anyway. But right. I will, because clearly this was a mistake. When we give Spurs credit for all the great picks they made, you sort of have to acknowledge when they made a mistake. This is a mistake. They could have, any of those guys you mentioned would have been better picks. But I do want to point out that none of the guys you mentioned, if they would have picked those guys, we wouldn't be looking at a Spurs franchise with a much different outlook heading into this season than they are right now. None of those were franchise-altering mistakes. Right. And this is not me saying, it didn't matter, or clearly all these things do add up. It did matter. But, they're still going to be in the spot they are now. None of those – this wasn't one of those – passing on Luka Doncic and Trae Young for Marvin Bagley type of things.
Right.
You're talking about just kind of minor shades of gray here.
The best way to sum that up is, if you had taken Brandon Clark and Keldon Johnson would have been a really nice draft for the spots the Spurs are picking into those. But, what are you going to do? The last thing, I don't know if you want to wrap up the Luka talk, but I don't want a full
Luka podcast. Sorry.
The last thing, then we can move on. I think just to put that whole draft into context, they were in 2019, they were about 6 weeks removed from just getting their butts handed to them by Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets in the playoffs. And it was sort of like this moment where they saw the future of the NBA big men. You need these guys, big guys who can dribble, who can play make, who can shoot from the outside, who can run the pick and roll. And no one thought Luka Šamanić was going to be Jokic. Nobody saying that. Nobody was thinking that. But the Spurs were looking for guys in that mold, in that role, and that was kind of the thinking at that time. This kid's young. Let's give him some time, and maybe he can develop into one of those sort of versatile, do-it-all big men that everybody in the league is coveting and is going to continue to covet. And it didn't work out. But that was the context. That was the thinking. That was kind of the swing that they took, and they swung and missed on that one.
I think one of the things that we talked about all the people you can pick after, but Jeff didn't point out some of the people that picked before him. He's not the only bust in this draft. Can't look at it that way either. I can't remember I can't pronounce the guy who got released from the Rockets just last week after getting traded by the Pistons. Seiko.
Oh,
Diombo.
yeah.
Then there's, Chuma Okiki at 16. Goga Betiti. I can't say half the guys' names. Every guy's name who's busted is really tough to pronounce for some odd reason. And this right above them, but there's 4 or 5 guys right above them. All guys haven't done much yet. in the NBA. So it's not like the Spurs are alone in this situation with the 2019 draft. It's only been 2 years, and there are a lot of good role players in that draft. You go 1 through 14, and you're like, oh, it wasn't a bad draft. You're not going to hit on every single pick. Only the Spurs do that. This is kind of the rarity when they didn't. I mean, apparently they need to pick 29th to get someone really good, though.
People tend to give the Spurs, like, they forget about your Livio Jean-Charles. They forget about your Nikola Mulatinov. Like, this isn't the first time they've drafted someone in the first round that hasn't really completely panned out. I mean, it happens to every team. So it is what it is. If you want, we can talk about players actually on the roster now. I mean,
when you're picking higher, like the Spurs did, it seemed going into someone else who's looking pretty good. You know, just the last pick, Josh Primo looking pretty good so far.
I was going to say, good time to segue to Josh Primo.
Well, one thing on the last Luka kind of ribbon on this conversation. Some of the criticisms about the Spurs during the DeMar LaMarcus era was, they're caught in this era where they're kind of clinging to the past and they're not embracing the future and they don't know what they want to be. And I think when you move on from Luka, it's like, I don't know. There's a tendency to kind of throw good money after bad in some of these situations and cling to something that is already like a sunk cost type of situation. And I think that this move kind of proves like, hey, we don't have time to just kind of waste a spot on a guy as a long-term project anymore. One answer could have been just drop Aminu and Eubanks, whoever, and keep building, keep sticking with guys who have some kind of potential.
In a way, it does take some guts and humility to say we give up on our 19th overall pick a year before we really had to make that decision.
Right. That's a much more succinct way to put it. Like there's no, if you've made the decision, as Pop and the front office clearly did, that this guy's just not going to help, I think it's fine to get rid of the guy now. And maybe he'll go off and have a good career somewhere else. A Lexi Wangmeni type career, not Lexi Wangmeni. Who am I thinking of? Who was the guy that ended up playing for the Mavs? A longtime Spurs project from way back in the Johnny Ledden days. Can you help me out here?
I don't know what you're not describing. This is the worst game of password I've ever tried to play.
The viewers, and I know they're not viewers, are screaming the name. The young center that they drafted.
Jan Mahinmi.
There you go. There you go. He never panned out with your local Cagers. Went on because he just wasn't ready yet, and went on and had like a decent little NBA career. Maybe Luka can do that. But go ahead, Tom, to your Josh Primo, what you wanted to say about him, who could be the steal of the 2021 NBA draft.
That's what Thad Young said. He's flashing everything that they said he has the potential to be. Certainly did it a couple of games ago, but Pop is, wisely, kind of tried to temper all the talk about him and isn't using him as much as people would like to see. But he certainly, like I said, he certainly flashed all the potential that they, that they had in mind when they picked him.
I mean, he's going to, I don't know that I'm breaking news here, and I'm just this is my own speculation, but he's going to start the year in Austin.
Yeah.
The question is how, will he stay there all year? How long does he stay there? Does he just blow the doors off the G League to the point where you just can't keep him there? But I have a feeling we're going to be arguing about Josh Primo being in Austin for a long time on this podcast, to be honest with you. But he's different than some of the other guys they've had in that you're already seeing him show up in NBA games, even though they're preseason games, against NBA talent and showing up in a certain way to where you could see him sort of just barging into the rotation, or at least onto the NBA roster earlier than a lot of some of the other, later first round picks the Spurs have had in the past.
We've talked about this before. I'm not sure if it's on the podcast or in media rooms or whatever, but in talking about some of the, run through the list of the Spurs who have spent their year in Austin, one common thread with the guys who ended up showing up in San Antonio, after their Austin duty and really thriving, is those guys dominated Austin.
Yes.
Jeff, you've mentioned this before. Derek White, DeJounte Murray, Lonnie Walker kind of did for a while, put up huge numbers in Austin and just looked like they almost didn't belong there anymore. And I think the Spurs see some value in letting a young guy do that and just really feel what it's like to dominate and succeed. And they think there is like, that's a productive path for some of these guys. And Luka never did that. Like Luka put up some big numbers every now and then.
He should have been a triple-double machine in the G League.
Right. And so I realized we need to stop talking about Luka, but one tell that he wasn't going to make it is he wasn't going up there and just kicking G League posterior, like the other guys did. And I think the Spurs would really enjoy watching Josh Primo do that for a while, and to kind of invite all the questions from the public about, well, why are you wasting this guy up in Austin when he could be doing that in San Antonio? Like they would love Primo to go up there and just dominate and to have people screaming at them to bring him back to San Antonio. I think that's exactly the kind of career path they like for these guys. And
I've liked what I've seen so far. I mean, he one of the guys I talked to after he was drafted, one of the old coaches from Toronto, and I know this is ridiculous, but he said, like, the first time I walked in the gym and saw that kid, not the way he played, not how good he was, but his demeanor, the way he approached playing. He was always the youngest guy on the floor, always playing against older guys, sometimes grown men. Every time I walked into the gym, and the first walked into the gym and saw him, this guy told me, I was thinking that reminds me of a young Kobe Bryant, just the way he knew he belonged, even though all these other guys were bigger, stronger, more experienced. And you see some of that even in these preseason games where he goes out there and, he had the big opening game against Utah where he scored 17 points in 18 minutes. And I think he did miss that one shot, but he was 7 of 8 in that game. And then Pop just kind of dialed the minutes back in the rest of the games, but he plays at the end and he plays in crunch time because it's preseason and you don't care about wins or losses. And so there was that game against Miami where the Spurs were down by 3 and Primo was in there for like 45 seconds at the end of the fourth quarter, got the ball in the corner and just let it fly. And it didn't go in, but it looked good and it was open and it was a shot he needed to take. And he was not afraid to take it in that situation, even though he was 18 years old and had just walked into the game in kind of a make or break situation. And he had a couple of those same kind of moments last night in Orlando where he made a couple big shots. He also, because he's 18, made some rookie mistakes that almost cost him down the stretch. But you don't see him get flustered or overwhelmed or he looks like he belongs at all times. And I think that's a pretty good first step.
And is he not younger than Luka was when he was drafted?
Yes. I mean, yeah. Josh, yes. And he's the youngest player in the NBA.
Not to beat the dead horse with the Luka thing, but there just never seemed to be a moment when you saw that kind of potential there with him. I mean, you saw the physical tools and you could squint and see a 6'10" guy that could run the floor and shoot and that kind of thing. But it never really manifested itself in even a preseason game like we just saw.
The last thing I would say about Primo is, though, that like fans that are clamoring to buy tickets for opening night against the Magic just to see Primo, like, I don't know, that you might be disappointed.
Who's doing that?
I think they're selling them like hotcakes.
But
I don't know. I'm just saying,
based on going to see Primo.
I'm just saying if you're going opening night because you want to see the first round draft pick, I think you're going to be disappointed. I don't know that he's playing a lot like right out of the gate.
I'm getting a text from the Spurs front office saying that they're threatening to pull Jeff McDonald's credential because they're trying to sell tickets, and you're just ruining it. I mean, why not perpetuate the idea that they can go see the HEB Primo picks as our producer Luis has just mentioned, that that's the big sponsorship deal. The HEB commercials are going to be off the hook with Primo picks and that kind of thing. And
fans are clamoring to get into that silver and black scrimmage on Wednesday.
Now you will see a lot of Primo in that
with dollar beer and the chance to see a lot of Primo.
how much money are the Spurs making off those ticket sales for the black and silver scrimmage, Tom?
Exactly.
How many beers are they selling?
About the same amount of money they're making off parking that night, Mike.
Which is $0?
Yes. So you got the $1 beer and you got the $1 soft drinks, though.
$1 beer, $1 soft drinks, free admission, free parking. Can the fans during the scrimmage walk up to either the polarizing Jeff McDonald or the or Tom Ringo Orsborn and like get autographs? Is that available?
Only if they're masked and fully vaxxed. And we should pass along that you get a substantial discount at the Spurs fan shop that night as well.
Do you?
Yes.
I mean, after Jeff tried to ruin
the Spurs.
Season.
That's right. Yeah.
Could I just interject just to make sure it's clear? I don't want anyone to approach me or speak to me or even look me in the eye. If anybody was wanting to, I would appreciate being left alone.
That sort of goes without saying.
Okay, just making sure.
While now, since Tom has done his duty and gotten people interested in the Spurs and got people excited about going to see them, I should point out that your local Cagers, the Spurs, are not requiring vaccination or proof of negative tests for their home games, which is interesting. And I realize nobody wants to have any hot takes on this, but it's happening in Dallas. It's happening in the liberal bastions of Oklahoma City and Salt Lake City.
Does that mean Kyrie Irving can play here?
Well, we'll see. I don't know. I understand that there are levels to this, and the Spurs are trying to get people in the arena and all that kind of stuff. And that's certainly their right. And everyone kind of brings it on themselves on what they want to do with their entertainment dollar and all that kind of stuff. So this is not a criticism. I'm just saying that the Spurs are not doing that. We will see how that. I hope it goes well. I know I would feel better covering the event if that was in place, but who am I to say how business should run itself?
What we're saying is, if you come to the game, you're not going to see Luka. You're probably not going to see Primo. Mm-hmm. Maybe you get sick. Like, is that what we're?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all.
All right.
I'm not saying
I was just thinking the same thing.
I hope that all of our listeners go to Spurs games, and I'm sure that all of our listeners are vaccinated or have had negative tests, just because we have that kind of erudite listenership. I mean, I think our people are all over it. Our viewers, our listeners. So I nothing would make me happier than just nothing but Spurs insider viewers at a Spurs game. Just pack the house, everybody be vaccinated, and it'll be great.
Far, I'm not the host of this podcast. Far be it for me to wreck traffic here. But do we want to talk to players that are going to play on the team, or do we just?
Well, I mean that's one approach. Like it's a podcast about if it's a podcast about a basketball team, and you want to talk about people who actually play basketball for that team. I mean, do you want to do? What I'm saying is,
if you want to, you can. Okay, let's do 25 minutes on Aminu then.
Go ahead. Which players that are going to play would you like to speak about?
Okay, let me pretend that I'm the podcast host. Can I do that? I've never tried this before. So first, I've decided you have to not pretend. You have to be an insufferable jerk. So I'm going to try that for the first time in my life.
First time.
And then I'm gonna ask Tom Ringo. What I'm going to say is Tom Ringo, Star Orsborn. What are your impressions of the team in preseason? What should be looking for besides Josh Primo? What should we be looking for?
Stuff. Did you stay up all night thinking of that?
Well,
I literally just came up with it. Can you tell?
We had that conversation, Jeff, about who's going to lead the team in scoring.
Oh, that's a good one.
DeJounte Murray, I think, was the consensus on press row.
I might be changing my mind, but I think I'm still leaning DeJounte because he's just going to have the ball in his hand so much.
Yeah.
Is that the best case scenario, or is the best case scenario for the Spurs ends up being Keldon Johnson?
That would be my other guess after watching the last couple of games. I don't know what best case. It's just an interesting dynamic in that it's hard to tell. Like there's just so many guys you could see. There's no DeMar DeRozan on this team where that was just sort of a shoe-in year in, year out. He was going to lead the team in scoring. So I guess it's DeJounte. He'll just have the ball so much, but Keldon is you started to see flashes of this. Like Pop said the other night, he's not just a bull in a china closet anymore. Like he's still got that sort of part to his game. But we've seen a couple I don't want to oversell it, but a couple of Kawhi-esque turnaround fadeaway jumpers out of him. We've seen a pull-up mid-range jumper out of him. He's starting to knock down just the catch and shoot threes a lot more with a lot more regularity than he has in the past. So I suppose that if he can get all that together, he could be the guy to lead your team in scoring. But we've just, DeJounte was the second leading scorer last year. The leading scorers off the team now in DeMar. I think DeJounte is the guy. If you had to put money on it, that might be who I put money on.
I liked a question you posed to one of the players in a recent post game. I forget who that player was, but you asked about what is the identity of this team going to be, and I think the answer, or at least the consensus from different people, is defense seems to be first and foremost on their minds. And in Detroit, I did a story on the defense, and I liked how the honesty from Jakob and Drew Eubanks talking about, well, it's not just the pieces that we have, it's the pieces that aren't here anymore. And that's as far as they went. But still, the message is clear. They seem, by subtraction, they seem to think they've upgraded the defense, and they have the pieces now to be a better than average defensive team.
Yeah, preseason numbers don't count, as we all know, but they're a top 10 defensive team during the preseason. I mean, you've seen that emphasis at least. Obviously, they're not playing against teams that are fielding their full roster of all-stars, but the Spurs are also in situations, because it's the preseason, where they're not playing their actual rotation either. So, you don't put too much stock in the preseason numbers, but I mean, you have to like what you see. They're not going out there, except for that game in Detroit. They're not going out there and just giving up 30-point quarters like they were so much last year. They've actually had 4 or 5 in this limited number of games where they're holding teams under 20 in a quarter, which is hard to do in today's NBA. So I don't know that they're going to become, the top defensive team in the league or anything like that. But it was certainly a point of emphasis after being mediocre to bad the last several years, to at least be competent on that. And we've seen stretches of that so far in the preseason. Absolutely.
I guess we could make mention too of Bryn Forbes in his new role, and a pretty good start shooting the ball. Seems to be comfortable in that same role that he had in Milwaukee after starting during his previous stint here in San Antonio. But he's shooting the ball well, and that's the other area they're looking to improve in, of course, is their 3-point shooting with the addition of Bryn and Doug McDermott.
Yeah, there was a lot of our listeners who aren't viewers, when they heard that Bryn Forbes was coming back, there was probably a lot of eye rolling. And I think if they were bringing Bryn Forbes back to start 82 games a year, I would probably join them in the eye rolling. But I think in that bench shooter role, I think he's pretty good. I think that's a pretty good addition. It's nice to have a guy, after losing so much corporate knowledge in Patty Mills, Rudy, DeMar, it's nice to have a guy that's been on the team for a while, or another one of those guys. So all that, Bryn's going to be a good addition to this. And yes, he's not going to help your defensive numbers so much, but that's what bench players are for. I mean, he's a bench player. He'll be a different. He'll be the things that drove a certain segment of Spurs fans nuts about Bryn Forbes the first go around here. I think will be lessened when he's coming off the bench and not starting.
Am I allowed to speak again?
I think Mike can be the host again.
Are you still here? Are you still here? I thought you were watching like a Law and Order.
Yeah, we're going to hand it back to Mike at this point.
I've just been riveted by all this analysis over the past several minutes. Of the new host taking it in a new direction.
Oh, I would just meant that for that. I just meant for the one question. You were supposed to come take the mic for me at some point.
Oh, I see.
I didn't mean for the rest of the day.
I just feel like I'm becoming obsolete, like a mid-range shooter in the modern NBA. I mean, Jeff McDonald has taken over the podcast and just dazzled everyone with.
Well, I don't know. We're talking about like players
stuff.
who are going to play on the team. We're talking to like players that matter. You know.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was good.
Yeah,
it was good. I learned a lot. I learned a lot. It was really good. Well, a couple of players that are on the team that we could talk about too, and we're heading towards a supersize preseason podcast here. But
I don't have dance class today, so it's fine. We can keep talking.
One thing I've noticed is Pop has, and I correct me if I'm wrong on this, but he's kind of gone to the old keep one of your star guards on the floor at every time. Like teams have done this with Harden and Westbrook in the past, and not that Derek White and DeJounte Murray are that level. But am I wrong on this? But the way the rotation has worked, he's tried to keep one of those two fellas running the show pretty much the entire game.
That is true, and I am a fan of that. I'm also curious to see how much of that is related to his backup point guard being injured the entire preseason.
Well, that was the question that was the follow up there.
So what will that look like when the guy he said is going to be the backup point guard is back? I don't know the answer to that question. We'll have to see where Pop wants to go with this. Then I'm kind of the fan that I'm kind of the belief that I like either DeJounte Murray or Derek White or both on the floor at all times. But that might not be where they're going with this. I don't know.
The backup point guard being Trey Jones, who did dominate during his G League stint, albeit a short one last year.
Yep. Trey is harder, and they like him. I think people on this podcast who like him a lot. Mm-hmm. I'm not totally on board yet, just because of, I guess, sort of the size thing, and I don't know. I'm not sure the pedigree is quite what like Derek or DeJounte were, and I don't think he's going to make that kind of leap. But I'm open to it. Sure, like give him a shot. And Tom is absolutely right that the numbers in the G League were great. He was pretty spectacular in the summer league too, wasn't he? He's one of those guys that looked like he didn't belong there anymore.
Yeah. I mean, he's a good guy to have in your bag, a good tool to have in your kit, a guy to have on the roster. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they're thinking exactly. I'm not sure he's an every night rotation player that you need him every night, but I think he's a guy that, will definitely contribute for you in spot duty here and there. I'm thinking of like a Corey Joseph type from back in the day.
Yeah. Poor man's Corey Joseph. Yeah. Since we've heard that phrase a couple of times here in the preseason.
That's a good comparison.
Poor man Dave Cowens. We've got a poor man's Pau Gasol, sort of burgeoning at least, and Jock Landale, according to who said that? DeJounte, I think.
Yeah, that sounds like we have a poor man's championship team.
Right.
Yeah. I do want to ask about Lonnie Walker, which we haven't talked about much in this, since we're covering pretty much all the bases here in this preseason podcast. It seems like he's going to be coming off the bench. Two questions for the two beat guys, Jeff and Tom. Do we think that he is going to embrace that? And how effective do you think he can be as that sixth man? Is he going to be a guy who can kind of come in and ignite stuff? Or is he going to struggle with that as a lot of good players have struggled coming off the bench in the past?
Yeah, that's kind of how he finished the year last year, was kind of that bench fire starter. And I think that's the role they envision him in. And it's a tough role because it can lend itself to some bouts of inconsistency. When you're coming off the bench, unless you're Manu, mm-hmm. and you're basically a starter coming off the bench, You can get into games where you're not in the flow of it as well, or you're not getting the looks that you were in previous games. So a lot of his, game logs will look funny. 3 points, 5 points, 18 points, 2 points, 20 points, like that kind of thing. And we've seen that this preseason, where he'll have games where it's almost like he's just running around for 20 minutes and you forget he's even out there. And then there was a game like in Orlando where he was a huge reason that they won that game. He had 16 points off the bench and was a big part of them jumping out to such a big lead in the first half. And he was doing it on, with the athletic moves that we're used to seeing from him, but also an occasional 3-pointer. He was also hitting jumpers and getting to his spots that way. And I think that's when I think the Spurs are especially their bench is going to be deceptively tough if Lonnie Walker is able to score the way he was able to score in Orlando. But we don't see that every night from him, and some of that might be him, some of that might just be the role that he's in.
That was his story as a starter as well. Although the pattern last year was when DeMar was out, he played much better.
Right.
And but I think he'll embrace it. I think he earned some points last year with the staff and his teammates. He was hurt. He had that wrist problem, and it bothered him a lot more than I think he let on. But with the problems that they had with COVID and Derek White's injury, he soldiered through that, didn't complain, and kept playing with pain. So, I thought he showed something last year in doing that.
I agree with that. Yeah, definitely.
I believe there's a deadline with him coming up, but we should mention that a lot of the things that we mentioned here, including this Lonnie Walker decision coming up, have been covered just expertly, eloquently, totally, way more in depth than with the host of this podcast who constantly gets in the way. Covered much better on expressnews.com and in the daily Spurs Nation newsletter, which you can sign up for at expressnews.com, where the polarizing Jeff McDonald and Tom Ringo Orsborn have you covered every single day. One of the best websites on the internet, people are saying. That's what I heard people saying. Maybe like a top 5 website on the internet, expressnews.com. So check that out. But the decision coming up is on the guaranteeing another year for Lonnie. I believe October 18th. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not guaranteeing another year. That's just when he can come up on it's a deadline for him to get an extension.
Deadline for an extension. Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
So
the host is wrong.
If that day comes and passes, then he becomes a restricted free agent next season.
And we got to think they've done this with all his predecessors.
No, that's not true. I mean, they've done it with a lot, but you're also looking like at a Jakob Poeltl situation where they let him go into restricted free agency.
Let me ask you this. If they had it to do over again, would they have done it with Jakob? Maybe not, because it worked out with Jakob. Like they kind of got him for a steal. Yeah.
It worked out pretty good.
As I was saying that, I was realizing that there was a moment. The way that unfolded is they did not extend Jakob when they could have. And then he played really well that next year. And they were thinking, we might should have extended him. And then it worked out in restricted free agency where they kind of got him on a great deal.
Yeah. To your point, they did extend DeJounte Murray. They did extend Derek White. So they do have a history of usually doing that. So, but I think it could go either way. We'll see.
But has Lonnie shown as much as those two at this point? I mean, that's
an excellent question.
You also don't have to go with the same numbers that they did with those two guys. An extension doesn't have to be the maximum allowable extension. I'm sure they could come up with some kind of.
Yeah, that's true.
There could be something in it for both of them.
Yeah.
The Spurs offered him a little bit less than DeJounte or Derek got, and he has the security of knowing where he's going to be. Maybe he plays a little better. I don't know.
What's also interesting is because Lonnie was he 18th overall? Was that when he was drafted? His starting salary was a little higher than both Derek and DeJounte. So
they have the ability to offer him more than those two guys got, but I don't think that will happen. Before we go, just I guess the last administrative thing is there's one more cut, right? And we can finish where we started. We had one cut, the big breaking news to lead off the podcast. No more Luka. The other one, I've thought since the day of the DeRozan trade that Amino was going to be the guy that would either get traded to somebody or waived because he just doesn't seem to fit what this season is all about.
Right.
But I could be wrong. Like that's where my bet would be right now. No inside knowledge.
Right. That would be my guess.
Okay.
Because he's 31. He's coming off 2 years of pretty horrific knee surgeries. He kind of plays a position on the wing that they're kind of want to stack with young guys that they want to play. And if you look at the preseason, he's made one appearance in the first 4 games. Like if you're not even getting on the floor during the preseason, then I think that's a pretty telltale sign. Like Keita has gotten into 2 games and he missed 2 with a hamstring injury. So Keita has actually been hurt and played in more preseason games than Aminu has. So I think Aminu would be a good fit for this roster if you didn't have to cut anybody. I mean, just in terms of having a veteran guy around, like they love him. They love him. He's a good sort of mentorship guy. I mean, he's a lot like Thaddeus Young, except Thaddeus Young is actually going to play a little as long as he's here. So if the Spurs had the ability to keep 16 guys, I think they would be fine. They would love to have him around, but because you have to cut somebody, and because this is a year where you're going young and learning and looking for progress from your young players, I think he's the guy that's going to be the odd man out there, and I think that seems pretty evident.
That's the way things go. Sometimes it's going to be painful to see him go, but sometimes in life, you have to make a few painful decisions, decide what you can live without, what you can live with, focus on the positive.
The point I've told everybody is all these guys are on guaranteed contracts, so they're making the same amount of money from the Spurs this year, whether they're on the team or not. That's a bright side. If you want to close on that note.
No matter what happens, these guys are taken care of. They have security. Security should be prized and treasured wherever you could find it. It can be a tough thing out there to feel a little bit of security and feel comfortable with where you're going. So you focus on the positives, even if the Spurs might not want you as a young recent draft pick or as a veteran trade acquisition, or even as a viewer, if they don't value you like you feel like you should be valued. Someone does. Someone out there does. And I just implore you to think about that and to find that comfort where you can. Because in the meantime, we're going to be here for you on the Spurs Insider podcast week after week after week, whether you like it or not. In the meantime, everybody out there should take care of each other and keep it real.